Tamatea Dusky Sound is a beautiful, remote part of New Zealand and the site of many pioneering interactions by Europeans. Home now to wildlife and occasional tourists, a team from Toitū Otago Settlers Museum and Heritage New Zealand, with the help of local tour operator Fiordland Expeditions, sets out on a mission of rediscovery. The aim is to see what remains from that historic era and share these remarkable stories of what was, for both Maori and European, the furthest frontier. James York is of the Kaitahu tribe from Ōrākei Aparima, one of several runaka with vested interests in the Fiordland area. This is his first visit to Mamaku, Indian Island, the site in Tamatea Dusky Sound where his ancestors first met Captain Cook.
Te toko toko I te luku, te toko toko I te rangi, toki a tuki a. Ko te mumu, ko te awha, ko te mumu, ko te awha. Ka whai tā more I runga, ka whai tā more I raro, tēnā ko te pau. Te pau o rongo, mauri o rā I aoe.
I think really initially it would be a safe haven for your travels up the coast to maybe collect pounamu. You know, like if you're coming up the coast from south, bad weather, pull into the sounds, you know, and probably likewise for a whānau from Taipōtini, you know, the sounds was a bit of a safe haven. So like we've seen, there's heaps of anchorages, shelter in all weather and stuff like that. But I think also it was a place of refuge because, you know, it's not really that easy to get to. And even when you're in here, to know where you're, you know, to navigate your way around, that corridor would have been passed down, you know. Whether you're coming from the sea or the inland, it's not an easy task to get here.
Southern Maori had long hunted and fished in Fiordland, known to them as Te Rua o Te Moko, while Dusky Sound was named after the great voyaging ancestor Tamatea. And within a day of the Resolution's arrival here, they were spotted by a Maori party coming up the sound. They looked at them through the pouring rain, and later in the day, a canoe with 8 in it came right up to the ship and sat there watching them. Cook called forth his most competent Polynesian speaker, Charles Clark, who hailed them in his best Tahitian, but they proved unresponsive, and after half an hour, they paddled away. Later, Cook took a boat and followed them round into Cascade Cove, and there he found their hastily abandoned campsite. He laid down their trinkets and treasures as signs of friendship, but later visits proved that they hadn't been touched, they hadn't returned to the campsite at all. The next encounter took place almost 2 weeks later on the 6th of April, when Cook and a small party were returning from an expedition hunting ducks across the sound at Duck Cove. As they passed this rocky promontory, an old man standing here called out to them in challenge, shaking his taiaha. Now Cook now demonstrated all that he had learnt from previous encounters with Maori, which hadn't always gone well. He came forward, tossing handkerchiefs onto the rocks, but when the old man didn't pick them up, he stepped forth himself, climbed up, holding out 2 sheets of white paper. Trembling with fear, the kaumātua nonetheless stood his ground and then reached out for one of the pieces of paper. The 2 men then grasped each other's hands and exchanged a hongi. It was an incredible display of bravery and trust on both sides. For two peoples, this was the first encounter. Their futures would henceforth be entwined. Amazing start. Now nearby were standing two women, just back off the promontory. The old man now called them forward. They both held spears as well. They came forward, and for the next half an hour, the two groups communicated by sign language, Cook's pidgin Tahitian proving of no use whatsoever. And at the end of that time, one of the women danced for the sailors. James York has little doubt that the Maori that met Cook's duck hunting party here would have been related to his people. He considers this first encounter as an act of courage by both parties.
This first encounter on this island, probably on both parts really, but to me probably more so on our Māori side, it would have been a brave thing to go out on that rock and go. Big ship with big white sails, and you'd have been thinking, what is this? The guy had his family here, you know, wasn't necessarily the tribe, he had his family. So, you know, to me that's like, you don't necessarily bring them here unless you're trying to keep them safe really. And it's all about survival. Maybe there might have been some assistance that Cook could have given them, and looks like he did. I think the exchange was quite peaceful. And of course, you know, like, you wouldn't be going out there to strike up a battle with people when you've got your whole family here and it's just you and a few boys, you know.
Next day, Cook, Pickersgill, the Forsters and Hodges went to visit their new friends at their camp in this tucked away cove on Indian Island. There they met the rest of the whānau. There was another teenage girl, a teenage boy, and three younger boys, including one who was still being breastfed. Cook then presented the family with some gifts, hatchets, spike nails, some beads, looking glasses, and in return he was given what he called 2 staffs of honour. Hodges then began to paint the portraits of the whānau in red pastel. The old man wanted to exchange a cloak with the big ship's cloak that Cook was wearing, but the captain didn't have one to spare. That night, however, Cook had a new boat cloak made up in red baize cloth, and the next day he returned to the camp to present it. This time, however, they were met ceremonially by the whole family, dressed in their best cloaks, with ornaments in their ears and feathers in their combed and oiled hair. And after what sounds very much like a pulphery, they sat down to a delicious meal of fish grilled in kelp. And then Captain Cook presented the kaumātua with the boat cloak. He was delighted and passed over his whalebone patu to the captain. The name Indian Island, Mamaku to Māori, records the site of this first encounter, reflecting the 18th century terminology which described all indigenous people as Indians. William Hodges made a number of paintings of the visitors subsequently, the first ever images of southern Maori, some of which have returned to New Zealand in recent years. Over the next 2 weeks, members of the whānau visited the Resolution camp pretty much every day, and one night Cook put on a special concert for them with bagpipes, fife and drums. And finally, on the 19th of April, the kaumātua and the teenage girl were finally prepared to come aboard the ship, first waving greenery and chanting karakia as they came up the gangplank. Once on board, they were amazed at the sheep and goats that were there. The girl stroked the ship's cat. They went down below to Cook's cabin, which knocked them out completely with all its bits and pieces, and they presented him with a pounamu adze and a feather cloak as mementos of their visit. Now, through all this period, various members of the crew tried to woo the teenage girl, but she was having none of it, and all advances were rebuffed, and they seemed to have been reasonably gentlemanly and didn't push their case too far. The kaumātua, meanwhile, had a few goes at firing a musket, and he even took a turn on a saw in one of the saw pits they had ashore where they were working there. There were further subsequent encounters with hunting parties all around the Sound, 3 or 4 family groups according to Cook's count. They were all equally peaceful and it involved further exchanges of gifts. All in all, it was a great start to bicultural relations, of all places in the extreme remoteness here of Fiordland. Unfortunately, there are no known Māori accounts of Cook's visit to Tamatea Dusky Sound. Some of the items that were gifted to Māori around the Sound by those on the Resolution later appeared elsewhere in Te Waiponamu, the South Island of New Zealand, evidence of Māori trading networks. Although details of his people in Tamatea may be sparse, James's first visit to this historic spot has really resonated with him.
You can stand on the rock, and you kind of think, wow, that's pretty special, really. To find, to see the pits, to see where their whare were, the wee cove. I just look at it and think, well, that's perfect, If you didn't really want to be noticed or found, and especially with a family, a young family, I suppose, perfect, really. We're not really sure the person here was who he was. No doubt they were Māmoe hapu. And so, that's pretty special. To me, it's like, well, these places are where my ancestors were wandering around,
Te tui au ki te kati te pakakeke umoi au e whiu tak tatari ke parakiwiti ni e pat mai ratai aroa i te kakerangi e takarura te moana e.
On the next episode of Furthest Frontier, Tales from Tamatea Dusky Sound, another round of European explorers arrive off the Fiordland coast, including New Zealand's only known Spanish expedition. All subsequent 18th century explorers made a beeline for this spot, and both ships had to endure a ferocious gale during their first week here. Vancouver went on from southern New Zealand to explore the northwest coast of America. The only sign of human habitation were a couple of abandoned huts in Facile Harbour.
People fled into the bush and that. Well, that's probably why, because they were very nervous.
And thus ended the only known Spanish exploration of New Zealand. Just 9 hours here in the extremity of Doubtful Sound.